Hey guys, welcome to my Vue JS Crash course. So this is a course that's designed to get you up and running with Vue JS as quick as possible. And it's geared toward beginners, so if you've never used Vue JS before, if you just dabbled with it, or even if you've worked with it but you want some refreshers or you want to learn about the composition API, then you're in the right place. And there's going to be a few different parts to this course. So first we're going to go through some slides and talk about what Vue is and how it works. And that shouldn't take very long, probably under 10 minutes or so. And then I'm going to show you how to get up and running very quickly using the CDN, which is the fastest way to use Vue, although you should only use that for really small projects and testing and just messing around. For larger projects, we use something called Create Vue, which is ultimately what we'll be using. So after we do that, we'll get into getting set up with Create Vue, and we'll go over the fundamentals of components, directives, data, methods, etc. We're going to look at a very basic task project. I wouldn't even call it an app. It's just a project to experiment with and learn different things, different directives, and so on. And then after that, we'll move on to our main job listing website. And since Vue is a front-end framework, we need a back-end for data. So we're going to be using something called JSON Server, which is a library that allows us to create basically a mock REST API. And we'll start with some hard-coded job data, but then we'll add some dynamic data from the API, and we'll learn how to make requests and so on. So I'll have the template files, the HTML with the Tailwind classes and all that available for you in the repo as well. If you took my latest React Crash course, it's the same exact application, and that was intentional so that you can compare the two frameworks. And I'll also be creating an Angular and a Svelte version of that job listing project as well, because that's essentially the reason for these crash courses, is so you can just get your feet wet and you can compare and contrast with other frameworks, and then you can decide on which one you want to specialize in. All right, so relax, get a coffee or tea or whatever it is that you drink, and let's get started learning Vue.js. This video is sponsored by daily.dev, which is a platform that lets developers stay up to date with current tech. And I've used the daily.dev Chrome extension for over a year now, so it opens up automatically when I open a new tab, and there's always something that catches my eye. In fact, there's been a bunch of articles that have given me inspiration and ideas for new videos. And it can often feel like you're falling behind because it seems like every day there's new trends and new technologies that come out. And daily.dev compiles information from all over the web, and you can even set up your own custom feeds with specific tags of the type of content that you want to follow. And you can manage categories, content types, and block certain tags. You can also create squads, and I've recently created a public Traversy Media squad, so feel free to join and stay up to date with my latest content. So visit daily.dev today and download the extension or use the web version. All right, so as with any of my crash courses, we're going to start off by defining what Vue.js is. So it's a progressive JavaScript framework used for building user interfaces and single-page applications, or SPAs. Although you do have meta frameworks now, such as Nuxt and Gridsome, where you can build server-side rendered apps as well as static websites. But we're sticking to SPAs in this project, or in this course. So it's designed to be simple, flexible, and incrementally adoptable, meaning you can start using it for small parts of your application and then gradually scale up. And Vue makes it easy for developers to integrate it into projects of all sizes, whether you're just adding some interactivity to an existing web page or building a complex web application from scratch. And with its reactive data binding and component-based architecture, Vue.js helps developers create dynamic and interactive experiences for users in a very straightforward and efficient way. So Vue was created back in 2013 by a developer, an independent developer named Evan You, who is, I believe, currently based in Singapore. At least that's what I know from his bio. And the reason that I like to mention that is because I think that the fact that Vue wasn't created by a Google or a Facebook or any other tech giant like most of the front-end frameworks were, and the fact that it still has the popularity that it has, I think that speaks volumes about the framework and about its quality and about its community. Now, as far as prerequisites, a lot of people ask me, when am I ready to learn a framework? And the answer to that is a tough one, because everyone has a different learning ability and different ways that they like to learn. I know people that learn JavaScript at the same time that they learned React or Vue. However, I don't think that's the optimal way to do it for most people. I think you should first learn the building blocks, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And when I say JavaScript, I don't mean just learn what a variable and a function is. I mean learn it to the point where you can build at least some kind of fairly simple front-end project without any framework. So I usually recommend the following: JavaScript fundamentals, so loops, functions, objects, arrays, things like that, events and DOM manipulation, the fetch API, and just basic HTTP, so learn how to make a request to public APIs, get data back, send a post request, etc. Things like arrow functions, high order array methods, destructuring, basically all the ES6 features that we got. I think you should know that stuff because you're just going to run into that constantly, and you don't want to get mixed up in what is actually JavaScript and what is actually Vue.js or React or whatever framework you're learning. You want to have a solid understanding of JavaScript. And then I think learning NPM is important, learning the Node Package Manager, because you'll be using that constantly, including using it to get set up with your initial Vue.js project. Now, before we talk specifically about Vue.js, let's talk about the role of front-end frameworks and why they were created and some of the advantages that you have. Because some people don't understand why you would use something like Vue or React or Angular. So one, you have enhanced user experience. So front-end frameworks are designed to make it easier for developers to create interactive user interfaces. They provide a lot of functionality out of the box and allow you to focus on the things that are unique to your application. And if you try to build a really interactive interface with just vanilla JavaScript, it can get really messy really quick. And I'm not saying that you can't do it, but it can just be really difficult, and it's kind of like reinventing the wheel. So next you have organization. Front-end frameworks are designed to make it easier for developers to organize their code. The UI is broken into components, and each component has its own state, its own properties, things like that. And they're also essential, front-end frameworks are also essential for collaboration. So if you have 5 different developers create an interface with vanilla JavaScript, you're going to get 5 completely different code bases. They're going to all have their own style. By using a framework, everyone can be on the same page, and it's much easier to collab and to build with a team. So performance, front-end frameworks are optimized for performance. They have a lot of built-in features such as the virtual DOM, which is a way of rendering the document object model without having to re-render the entire DOM every time. This is a huge performance boost and gives users a really fast UI. And then one of the key benefits of front-end frameworks is their modularity. They allow developers to break down their applications into smaller, reusable components. And this modular approach not only makes the code base more manageable and easier to understand, but it also promotes reusability. So those are just some of the reasons why we use front-end frameworks. I'm not saying that you should always use one. In fact, that's something I see a lot of people doing these days, is using Vue or React or Svelte to create something like a very simple landing page. And I think that can just overcomplicate things. So you have to look at each project individually. All right, so that's just the role of front-end frameworks. Now let's talk about why Vue, because there's quite a few out there. So first we have simplicity and approachability. Vue.js is renowned for its simplicity and ease of integration into existing projects, and it has a very gentle learning curve, and it makes it accessible to developers with varying levels of experience. And it allows them to quickly get started and become productive rather than learning something like Angular. And I don't mean to trash Angular, but it is a very difficult framework to learn, and it's going to take you a lot more time to start building stuff. So flexibility, Vue.js is designed to be incrementally adoptable. Again, that means that you can introduce it into your projects gradually, and whether you need to build a small widget or a full-fledged single-page application, Vue.js scales effortlessly, and it allows you to meet very diverse project requirements. Next, we have performance and size. So Vue.js offers excellent performance due to its efficient rendering mechanisms, including the virtual DOM. Additionally, Vue's core library is very lightweight, which contributes to faster initial load times and better runtime performance. and it's known to be one of the fastest front-end frameworks around. Vue promotes component-based architecture, and components are self-contained units that can be reused across different parts of your application, fostering maintainability and code reusability. Vue.js also has a really vibrant community and rich ecosystem of libraries, tools, and plugins. In addition to building single-page applications, you have meta frameworks like Nuxt.js, which allows you to build server-side rendered applications, as well as frameworks like Gridsome, which allows you to build static websites. So Vue has a great ecosystem that is similar to that of React. Now, choosing Vue.js over React, Svelte, Angular, it often boils down to personal preference. And you should also take into account what's being used in the industry, and especially in your area. But I'm also of the opinion that you should enjoy the framework that you're working with all the time. So my advice is to always try the frameworks that interest you. That's why I create these crash courses, so you can get your feet wet and create something and see which one really clicks with you. And I think that building the same project with multiple frameworks really gives you a lot of insight. So as with any other front-end JavaScript framework, Vue.js is built around the concept of components. And components are reusable, self-contained pieces of code that can be easily dropped into different projects. And Vue components have a very simple structure that's broken into three parts, essentially. So first we have the logic, which is the JavaScript, and this is wrapped in script tags. This is in an actual Vue file. Your components have a .vue extension. And this is where you would define any state or data, as well as any methods, events, imports, things like that. Then you have your template output, which consists of HTML that will be rendered. However, we can also include dynamic elements within this template, such as variables, loops, conditionals, using something called directives, and we'll cover these later. And then you have the style, which is the CSS, and you can add scoped, which means that the styling will only pertain to that specific component. So this is just a very simple example. I don't even have any JavaScript or CSS, but you can see how it's clearly broken up into those three parts. And you might not even have any style, or you might not even have any logic. It could just be a dumb component, which is just something that displays something. And then you should also be aware of the two ways to build Vue components. One is the options API, which is kind of the traditional way of doing things, where everything is within objects or options, the data, the methods, etc. And it's more straightforward, and it can be a good choice for smaller projects. However, the composition API, which was released with Vue 3, is more flexible and allows you to create more complex components. And I'm going to give you an example of both, but overall I want to use the newer composition API. And if you really want to get into the options API, you can also look at my older Vue JS Crash course, because that's what we used in that one. With both ways, you can define state data, methods, lifecycle hooks. You can have certain things happen at certain times, such as when the component is done loading, etc. So, I mean, they're similar in what they do, but the way that you write them is pretty different. So the last slide that I have is just getting set up. There's different ways to do this. The easiest way is to use the CDN, although this isn't really the recommended way if you're building any serious project. So basically you can just include the URL in a script tag, and you can just use Vue.js. You can initialize a Vue instance and go from there. And I'm going to show you an example of how to do this, as well as using Create Vue. Now there's something called the Vue CLI, which was used and popular for a very long time. It's a command line interface to scaffold up a Vue project. It includes a rich collection of official plugins and integrations. However, the Vue CLI isn't recommended for new projects anymore, and I believe it's in maintenance mode, meaning that it will only receive bug fixes and security updates. If you go to the Vue CLI website, you'll see that it's no longer recommended, and they actually suggest using Create Vue. And Create Vue uses the Vite web server and front-end tool, and it includes features like hot reloading, out-of-the-box TypeScript, and other features. And it also has a rich ecosystem of plugins and integrations. So we can set up a project with one single command, and this is what we'll be using for our job listings app. And then another way to use Vue is with meta frameworks. Just like React has Next.js, Vue has Nuxt.js, which allows you to create server-side rendered applications. And then Gridsome is a static site generator that uses Vue. It's comparable to Gatsby and React. So these frameworks have their own tools to get set up, and they're definitely things that I think you should check out, but I always suggest learning the core framework first and learn how to build single page applications, then move on to, SSR and SSG. So that's it for slides. Now we're going to jump in, and like I said, I'm just going to show you real quick how to use Vue with the CDN, and then we can jump in and use Create Vue. All right, guys, so this is the Vue JS documentation, which is pretty good, and I'd suggest just keeping it open as a supplement to this crash course, and you can check things out. There's obviously going to be stuff in here we're not going to go over because this is meant to be kind of a beginner's guide. Now, you can switch here from composition to the options API, and it will change the code examples because the logic in your Vue components is going to be different depending on which API you use. We're going to start off using the options API, but then ultimately we're going to use the composition API in our main project. So to get started, there's a few ways that you can do it. The recommended way is to run Create Vue, and that will scaffold up a project for you, and you can have your single file components, meaning you can have components in a file with a .vue extension, and it allows you to build, really scalable applications. But if you just want to try things out, or you just have a little bit of functionality you want to add to an existing project, you can use the CDN, and that's what I want to show you first. So we're just going to spend a few minutes using the CDN. So I'm going to copy this script tag right here, and we're going to just go into, I have this empty folder called Vue Test, and I'm going to open that with VS Code. And then we're just going to create an index.html and just scaffold up an HTML document. We'll say Vue Test, and then let's add in that script tag with the CDN. And we now have access to the Vue object. So in the body, what I'm going to do is just have an ID of app. And if you're familiar with how React works, if you've ever used React or Angular, in a single page application, you have a specific div, a specific element, and you basically bind your UI to that element. And that's what this is. So down at the bottom, let's add in some script tags, and then I'm going to create a variable called app, and what we can do is use the Vue object to create a new instance or to create a new app, and there's a method called create app, and what that's going to take in is an object, and then here we can define any data or methods that we want on this in this app, and the data, and for now we're using the options API. This is going to be a function called data and that returns an object. Okay, it can be a little confusing because some people think it's, when you first get started, it's something like this where you have a data object, but it's not. It's a function called data and returns an object. And then in here, we'll just define something like, let's just say message, and we'll say hello from Vue. Okay, and now what we can do is go under where we created the app variable, and we can mount that, so app.mount to the ID of app, or whatever you choose to call this. And now inside this div, we should be able to use interpolation, which is going to be it's going to be double curly braces, that's the syntax, and then we can use any of the variables that we have in our data. So if I go ahead and save this, and I'm just going to open it with live server, we get hello from Vue. All right, so any data we put in here, we can then add in here, and it's basically dynamic. Now we can also have events and methods, and I'm going to go over this stuff in depth later on. I'm just doing this really quick so you can see how useful it is to just use in your projects. But let's go, we'll actually put an H1 around this message. Okay, and then underneath that, let's create a button, and I'll just say click me, and then we can add an event by doing @ and then the event, which is going to be a click, and then set that to the name of a method, which we'll just call it click me. All right, so now this method we can define down here in our app. So we want to go under the data function, which ends right here, and then we're going to say methods, and that's going to be an object of methods. So let's say click me, and then all I'm going to do here is just console log, and we'll say button clicked. Okay, so now we have the button, and if I open up my console and I click, we see in the console button clicked. Okay, so you can see this is very easy to implement, and it's nice and structured. So you have all your data, your state, and then you have any methods, and also you have access to this data from within your method. So for instance, I could do, let's say this, so we use the this keyword dot message, and we'll just say updated message. So now if I click this, that changes to updated message. All right, so that's about as far as I want to go with the CDN. Just wanted to show you how it works. Now we'll go ahead and create a new application using create Vue. So I'm just going to close this up, and we can delete that. Okay, and then I'm going to open up a terminal and just navigate to wherever you want to create this. And we're going to run npm create space Vue at latest, and then whatever you want to call the folder, I'm going to call it Vue Crash 2024. Okay, so this is going to ask us a few questions and what we want to include. If you want TypeScript, you can. I'm going to say no. You can also have JSX support within your templates. We'll say no. And then the Vue router is important, and I do want to use the Vue router in our project, but I'm not going to say yes here because I'm going to show you how to set it up from scratch. So we're going to say no for now. And then Pinya is a state management library similar to like Redux, and if you have a larger application, you might want to include it, but we're going to say no. We're not doing any testing, so tools for unit testing and end-to-end testing, we're going to say no. ESLint, no. Vue Dev Tools, no. And then let's cd into that folder, and we do have to run npm install or npm I to install the dependencies. Okay, then once that's done, I'm just going to go ahead and open up this folder in VS Code. And I'm going to go over all the files, and not all, but most of these files and folders in a minute. But I just want to mention for extensions, you want to install a Vue extensions, and there's a few to choose from, but what I would recommend is this one right here, Vue Official. This is going to give you all the syntax highlighting and stuff that you need. If you don't install a Vue extension and you go to a .vue file, you're not going to have the correct highlighting, and it's not going to be a very good experience. So just be sure to install this one or one of the other ones if you know of another one. All right, so let's look at the package.json first. It's pretty simple. We just have the Vue framework as a dependency. We have Vite as a dev dependency. That's our dev server and our dev tool. And there's an ecosystem of plugins for Vite and Vue. This plugin Vue is one of them, and that's what allows us to use Vue JS. There's also a React plugin and many others. And then for scripts, we have the dev script, which will run our local dev server. We have the build script, which will create our production build, and then we can preview our production build with preview. So pretty simple package.json. We also have the Vite config, and this is where you would bring in your plugins, such as the Vue plugin, and initialize it in the plugins array. One thing I like to do is change the port, because by default, the dev server uses, I believe it's 5173 or 5713. I like to use 3000, so I'm going to add the server object here. And in that, I'm going to say port and set that to 3000. You don't have to do that. That's just something I like to have my front-end projects on port 3000. So the index.html, this is the single page of the single page application. So this is what the browser loads. As you can see, there's an element with the ID of app, just like we had when I used the CDN, and that's where our UI is rendered. And that comes from the main.js file in the source folder, which is basically the entry point to Vue.js. And since we're using Vite, this is included as a module, because Vite has ES module support. So unlike Webpack, where it would be, a compiled, bundled JavaScript file. So the title, I'm just going to change that to Vue Jobs, and we can save that, close it up. And then the source folder, this is where, all the magic happens. This is where all of our components go. The main.js, this is the entry point. And again, we're bringing in create app, just like I did when we had the CDN, and we're mounting to that div that I showed you with the ID of app. And what we're mounting to it is this app.view component, which is right here in the source folder. And this is bringing in some other components from the components folder. So, and you don't have to worry about this code. We're going to wipe it all away. But as you can see, there's a script, template, and then style. So it has those three main parts. And then for the CSS, this main CSS, we're actually going to be using Tailwind for our project. So I'll show you how to get that set up. There's a couple steps we have to go through. But yeah, that's pretty much the structure of what you get when you scaffold up a Vue app. So I want to just clean things up a little bit. Actually, let's run the dev server first. So if we run npm run dev, as you can see for me, it's starting on 3000 because of that, what I added in the config file. And it's just the landing page. It's just this stuff here, this hello world and so on. But what I want to do is just get rid of all this. So in the components folder, we can actually delete everything here. And in the app.view, I'm going to just for now get rid of the script. And let's clear everything out of the template. We want to keep the template tags, but clear everything out and then clear out all the style. And for now, we'll just have an H1 and we'll just say, I don't know, we'll say hello, or let's just say view jobs. Even though we're going to do some stuff first just to demonstrate what certain directives are and so on before we actually start on our application. But as you can see, now it's just showing the template here. Now, before we do anything else, I just want to go over a few things. So as I said, as I showed you, we have our script that can go at the top, but you can also put your script down here if you want, which is more the convention with Vue 2, but I like to have it at the top. And then you can have your style, and you can scope that to this specific component by saying scoped. So anything I put in here, like if I put H1 and I make that red, that's only going to be in the H1s that are in this particular component. Now, just like we had in where we use the CDN, we can define data in this component. Let's do that. So we'll open up our script tag and we're going to export default in objects. Now, as I said, I'm going to start with the options API and we're just going to do a few things. I'll show you some directives and then I'm going to go back in and switch it up and convert it to the composition API. So you have a clear definition of both APIs. So with the options API, you do have to export default from the script so you have access to the data and methods in your template. So in this export default, we can define our function called data, and that will return an object. And in that, we can put our data. So let's just say name, and we'll say John Doe. All right, now, since I have this name, I can use that down here. So in this H1, I'll replace that, and I'm going to use interpolation with double curly braces, and I can just put name, and as you can see, it's now outputting John Doe. So that's how we can create data and use it within our template. Now, we're going to look at something called directives, which allow us to basically make this template dynamic, and we can have things like conditionals and loops and events. So let's start off by adding another piece of data here called status, and I'm going to set that to true for now, just a Boolean. And then under the H1, I'm going to have a paragraph, and the first directive I want to show you is v-if. And all these directives are going to start with v-, and you use them just like any HTML attribute. So let's say v-if, and then I'll say status. Okay, so it's going to look at that status data, and I'm going to say user is active. And if I save that, now we can see user is active on the screen. And if I change this status to false, now we don't see it. So that's v-if, just like any if statement. And we also have v-else. So if I go under that and let's have a paragraph and say v-else, and then I'll say user is inactive. If I do that, now user is inactive, and if I were to set that to true, then user is active. Now I'm going to change this from a Boolean to a string, and we'll say active, and I'm going to show you v else if. So let's say, well, first of all, instead of just saying if status, let's add in here if status is equal to active, then user is active. And then we'll have another paragraph and we'll say v dash else if equals status, and let's say if that status is equal to pending, then we'll say user is pending. Okay, so now we see user is active. If I change this to inactive or anything at all, that's not active or pending, then it's going to show this, right? User is inactive. And if I add pending as the status, then user is pending. All right, so that's how you can use those conditional directives. Now the next one I want to show you is v-for, which you can use to iterate over array items. So let's go ahead and add some data here. I'm going to call this tasks and set that to an array, and we'll just use an array of strings. We'll say task 1, task 2, and task 3. Okay, and then what I want to do is down here under these paragraphs, I want to loop through. Actually, let's put an H3 and just say tasks. And we're not building like an actual app here. It's just to give you an example of these directives. So let's say we want a UL and we want a list item for each task. So what we can do is create a list item, and then we can use v-for, and it's basically a for in loop. We can say task in tasks. Okay, so this task refers to the data up here, right? And you can call this whatever you want. But since we use task, we'll be able to use that within our list item. Now, when you create a list like this, just like with React, you have to add a key. So we do that by doing :key, and then I'm just going to set that to the task. It should be something unique. All right, and then inside the li, let's just output the task itself with interpolation. So now if I save that, you can see we have tasks 1, 2, and 3 in list items. So that's v-for. Now the next one we have is vbind, which allows you to bind a piece of data to an attribute. So for instance, if we have, let's say, link, I'm just going to use https google.com, and then let's say down here we have an a tag, and I want to bind that link to the href. What I can do is say v-bind : href, and then set that to link, and I'll say click for Google, and now if I click that, it should go to google.com. That was just cached. So yeah, so you can bind any data to any attribute. Now this is the long way of doing it. I'm going to just copy this down and comment that out because I want you guys to have this. But the shorter way is to get rid of vbind and just have the : and then the attribute. Okay, so when you use a : what you're saying is this is going to be dynamic. This is not just text of link, it's a variable. Okay, if we do that without the : then we're just setting it to a string of link. So that's vbind. Now for events, there's a couple ways to do it. I already showed you one of them, and I'll revisit that, but we can use the v-on directive. So let's create a button. I'm just going to put a space here, and let's say button, and let's say change status. Okay, and then what I want to do here is say v-on : click, and then set that to a function called toggle status, right? So when I set this v-on click, and you can use other events too, but we want to click, and then we can create a method. So just like I showed you earlier, let's go under the data and say methods, and then in here I'll put toggle status like that, and what I'm going to do is change the status, and I can access any of this data. I can access in the methods by using this, and this is with the options API. It's different with composition, which I'll get to soon, but I'm going to go ahead and just have an if else if here. So let's say if this dot status is equal to active, then I'm going to set this dot status equal to pending. Okay, else if this dot status is equal to pending, then I'm going to set it to inactive. So this dot status equals inactive, and then we'll have an else, and then we'll set this dot status equal to active. All right, so now we have this button, and I'm just going to put a line break right here. Okay, and if I click change status, you'll see that now it says user is inactive, user is active, user is pending, so it's reacting to my button click here. Now the shorter way to do an event, I'm just going to comment that down, is we can do, instead of v on colon, we can replace that with the at symbol and just say at click, and now you'll see that that still does the same thing. All right, so I mean, in my experience, you see this more than you do this. All right, so yeah, I think that's pretty much all I want to show you as far as the options API. So you have your data, you have your methods. It's very straightforward, and you'll probably find that the composition API seems a little tougher at first, but it's much more flexible, and you can create much more complex components. And there's a long way of doing it and a shorter way. I'm going to show you the longer way first. All right, so do I want to keep this? You know what, I have, I'm going to put the blog post in the description, which has all the code, like every bit of code I write in this tutorial, so I am going to get rid of this. Oh, you know what I'll do is I'm going to rename, or not rename, I'm going to copy this and then rename that to, let's say, app2, and then back in app.view, I'm going to get rid of everything in the export. Okay, so I want to keep all this because whether you're using options or composition, this stuff is going to be the same. The directives, all that, those don't change. It's just the logic. All right, so we want to have, and I'll keep this open too so we can see, we want this data back, but using the composition API. Now with the composition API, we have to wrap everything in a setup function. Okay, and there's a shorter way of doing this, and I'm going to show you that after. So in setup, we can then define our data just like we would normal data. We don't have to have a data function or anything like that. And I'm going to set that to John Doe. And then we want, what else did we have? The status, which I'll set to active. And then we have our tasks. So we'll say task 1, task 2, and task 3, and then we have the link. I guess we don't need the link, so I'm going to get rid of this this right here. Okay, so I saved, and you see that the tasks aren't showing. I'll get to that, but let's create the function, because remember we have the methods object with a toggle status. What I'm going to do is copy everything in the toggle status body, and then we're going to define the function here. I'm going to use an arrow function. So toggle status equals arrow, and then we can paste that stuff in there. All right, and then what we'll do is in the setup function, we're going to return. So down at the bottom, setup ends right here. So I'm going to return the name, the status, tasks, and toggle status. All right, so now we can see our tasks are back, the name is back. So basically we have our setup function, we have our data, we have our method, and we're returning all that. Now, if I click this, notice that it's not changing the status. The reason for that is these aren't, by default, these values are not reactive, and we need the status to be reactive because we want it to react to this button. So the way that we fix that is we need to wrap it in a function called ref. There's also a function called reactive, which you can use with objects, but I'll get to that later. So what we need to do is import ref. So up here we're going to say import ref from Vue, and then we just need to wrap our data, so ref, and we're going to wrap John Doe, And then for the status, ref, wrap that, and ref like that. Okay, so I'm going to save it and then click change status, and notice it's still not working. That's because when you have a reactive variable like we do here, we don't use the this keyword, and we need to use dot value. So what we can do is change these instances of this dot status to status dot value. Save that, and let's come over here, and now it works. All right, so this is the conversion of this, the options API, to the composition API. Now there's a bunch of things we can do to shorten this up. This is the long version. So first off, we can, instead of using the setup function explicitly, we can actually put it in the script tag like this, script setup. And then not only do we not need the setup, but we don't even need to export default, so we can get rid of both of these lines. And then down here, get rid of both of these. And then since we don't have an explicit setup, we don't even need to have this return. We can completely get rid of that. Okay, so now that looks a lot cleaner, right? We don't have the setup function. We're just using setup here. We don't have the export, which is nice because with the options API, you need the export. And then we're not returning anything. It's just implicit. So if I click change status, it still works. All right, so this is the composition. This is the options. And it's up to you on what you want to use, but again, this is much more flexible. This is very rigid, right? You have a data function that you need to return the specific object. You have a specific methods option or object with all your methods. Here, it's more like a React application, right? And ref, you can think of ref sort of as use state in React if you are familiar with React, because with use state, you can't just have a variable and then just reassign it to something. You update it with use state. That's kind of similar to what we do here, although you can just directly set the dot value, which I think is much neater. Now, I know we're like a half hour or more into the video and we haven't started the project yet, but there's a couple other things I want to show you. And the reason I'm showing you all this stuff now is so we can kind of go through our project with ease. Obviously, there's new things that I'll show you there, but you're already going to know, understand reactive variables and how to create methods and events and directives. So let's add a little form where we can add a task to this list. So I'm going to go into the template and let's see, we'll just go, it doesn't really matter, this doesn't have to look good at all, but we'll go above the H3, okay, and then I'm going to create a form tag, and what we can do here is either use v-on-submit, we can use the v-on directive, or we can just do @submit and set that to a function which I'm going to call add task. Now, when you submit a form, whether it's vanilla JavaScript or whatever, you have to do, e.prevent default because you have to prevent that default behavior. But what we can do here is we can just do .prevent, and then we don't have to worry about doing event.prevent above in the method. So in the form, let's add a label. So we'll say let's call it new task, and we're just going to say add task, and then we'll have an input type is going to be text ID. We'll say new task. What else do we want here? Let's do a name of new task. Now what we can do is we can bind a piece of data to an input. And we can do that using the vModel directive. So up at the top here, where we have our data, let's say const new task. Just like with React, I know I'm saying a lot about React, but I'm guessing a lot of you guys have at least a little bit of experience with it. And it's fine if you don't. It's absolutely fine. But with React, usually when you have form inputs, they're attached to a part of your state, and that's what we're doing here. So we're setting new task to ref, and it's just going to be an empty string. That's our default. And then down here in the input, we can then set the vModel attribute or directive to new task. Okay, so now if I put something as the default in this new task and I save, it's going to show in the input. So those two are bound together. All right, now let's create the add task. So I'll go right under the toggle status. Let's say const add task. All right, and actually I forgot a submit button. So under that, what is going on? Under that input, let's do button type is going to be submit, and I'll just say submit. All right, so we have our add task, and I'm just going to do just a little bit of validation. We're just going to check to make sure that it's there. So let's say if new task dot value, and we'll do dot trim. If that is not equal to nothing, then we're just going to add it to the list, the array. So we have access to tasks.value, right? And then we're going to push on to that, and we're going to pass the new task.value. And then we'll clear it by saying new task.value, and we can set that to nothing. So it's nice that we can just set it equal to something. So now I'm going to go up here and I'll say task 4, enter, and there we go. So I can just add tasks. And obviously they're not going to stick if I reload because we don't have any persisting database or anything. Now, the last thing I want to do in this little project here is delete a class. Delete a task. So down here where we have our tasks, we have our list item. And what I'm going to do is, let's see, I'm going to put this task, I'm going to put this in a span. Yeah, so we'll do that. Put that in a span, and then I want to have a delete button. So right under it, let's say button, and we're going to add, for the content, we'll just put an X. And then we're going to have a click event, so at click, and set that to delete task. Now we need to pass in something so that we know which task we're dealing with. And when we have a v4, we can actually get the index too. So instead of just saying task in tasks, we can open some parentheses and we can get the task, but we can also get the index. And then let's pass in index into the delete. All right, so now, whoops, I don't want to move that. So now up at the top here, let's go down under add task, and let's say const delete task. Okay, and that's going to take in index. All right, now to delete this is going to be very simple. I'm just going to take the tasks.value, and I'm going to use splice, and I'm going to splice at the index and then 1. So that should just take it out. So if I go to task 2, I click that, task 2 is gone. Okay, so now we can dynamically add and remove tasks, change the status. Now the last thing I want to show you before we move on to the Vue jobs is lifecycle methods. So if you're familiar with React, you might be familiar with these. These are functions that are called at different points in the lifecycle of a component. So for example, this onBeforeMount is called before the mounting begins. OnMounted calls when the component is mounted. And this, I would say, this is probably the most common one. If you're going to make an HTTP request when your component loads, this is probably what you're going to use. You also have onBeforeUpdate, onUpdated, onBeforeUnmount, onUnmounted, onActivated, onDeactivated, and onErrorCaptured. Okay, so these are the lifecycle methods that you have to work with. So let's just do something real quick. I'm going to just fetch some to-dos from JSON placeholder, which is just like a fake REST API. Same people that created the JSON server that we're going to use. And I'm just going to add them to the task list here when the component mounts. So let's go to the bottom here, and we're going to say on mounted. And actually, we do have to bring this in. So let's go up at the top and just bring in onMounted from Vue, and it's a lowercase o. All right, so in onMounted, it takes a function, and I'm going to make this asynchronous because we're going to be using the fetch API. So we'll say async and use an arrow function, and let's just put this in a try catch. So we'll say const response, set that to await fetch, and the endpoint is going to be HTTPS and JSON placeholder dot typecode dot com and then slash to-dos. So there's different resources we're going to get to-dos, which are basically tasks. And then let's say const data, set that to await the response.json. And then I'm going to take the tasks.value and set that to the data. Now I just want the title because the data is going to be a bunch of objects, right? They're going to be to-do objects. So I'm going to use map so that I can just get an array of titles. So I'm going to say for each task, then I just want the task.title. All right, and then in the error, I'll just do console log of, we'll just say error fetching tasks. All right, so let's save that, and there we go. So you can see it's fetching the data. It's just turning it into an array of titles and adding it to the tasks array. So now we can see them. We can also delete them. We can add more, so that should get added to the bottom. So you can see right here. All right, so that's pretty much the fundamentals of Vue JS. So now we'll move on and we'll create a more real life application. So what I'm going to do is take everything that I have in app.vue and I'm going to put it in the app2.vue so you guys do at least have this code. Close that up and then we'll completely get rid of everything. Just put a template in here. I don't know why Emmet's not working. And let's just do an H1 and say view jobs. All right, so let's get Tailwind set up. And if we go to, or if we just search for Vue Tailwind, there's a documentation page that we can follow. So it's going to be right here. It's in the Tailwind CSS documentation. So we want to run this, so npm install Tailwind CSS and post CSS in the auto prefixer. So we can just grab that. And I'm just going to open up another terminal here. Actually, wait, I don't. Okay, so I'm going to paste that in. All right, once we do that, we need to create a Tailwind config, which is going to be this. And if we add the -p, that'll also create a post CSS config file. So I'm going to paste that in. All right, now there's a few things I want to add to the Tailwind config. So I'm going to close that up. And notice in the documentation here, they still have purge. Now, well, it's now content. All right, and what you want to put in here is what files do you want to watch for Tailwind classes. So the first thing I'm going to put in here is going to be // and then index.html, which is the entry point basically. All right, then I'm going to add the folders and file extensions that I want to watch. So it's going to be /source, so in the source folder, and then / and then double asterisk / asterisk dot, and then in curly braces, I want to look at the following extensions: Vue, JS, TS, JSX, in case you're using JSX, and TSX. All right, so that's what we want in content. Now, in theme, there's a couple things I want to add to extend. One is going to be the font family. So I actually want to use the Poppins font. So what we can do is add sans and set that to an array, and we're going to pass in here Poppins and sans dash serif. Okay, so that's that. And then under font family, I'm just going to have a class of grid. I want to do grid template columns because on the actual job page, I want to have split columns where one is 70 and one is 30. So we'll have a class, let's do 70/30, and then we're going to set that to a value of 70% and not quite 30, but 28%. Okay, so it's just adding some extra classes for Tailwind, or an extra class. And that's it. So we can close that, or we can save that. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else. The variance extend we don't need, but I guess we could put it in there like that. And yeah, so we can close that up. Now we can continue on here. And let's see, it'll also create a post CSS. Yep, that's already created. We don't need to do anything to that. That's the post CSS. And let's see, what else? We already did this, the purge, which is now content. And then the last thing we have to do is just add these 3 lines to our CSS file. So that's going to be in assets and then main.css. I'm going to replace everything here. Add that, and now if we look at our project, let's see, is this being included? Should be, because you know what, I might have to restart the server. There we go. All right, so Tailwind classes should now work. We can test that out by doing class. Let's set that to text-2xl, and there we go. So Tailwind is now working. Now I like to have my projects at least look decent. So in the final repository, which is a link to in the description, you're going to see a repo that has the final code, and it's going to have this _theme files, and this is just the HTML for the project. Like if I open the index.html, you can see basically just the interface, or just the website. It's not functional or anything, and there's no data, real data. It's just the HTML. All right, so what I would suggest doing is bringing that into your you can bring it into your project or open it up in a separate editor. So I'm just going to copy the folder into here so that I have access to those. So for when we need the HTML. And then also, if you look in source, there's going to be in assets, there's an IMG folder, so I want to bring that over to our assets folder, like that. And I think all that's in there is the logo. Let's see. Yeah, it's just a logo. And we can get rid of the base CSS and this logo SVG. We can delete both of those. Okay, so now we have the logo. Now the first thing I want to do, and you know what, I'm just going to open up the theme just so we can see what the page we're looking on looks like and what we're actually working on at that time, which first I want to do the nav bar here. So the nav bar is going to have the logo and then just some links, and I want it to have active links. Like if I click on jobs, I want the jobs to be highlighted in the nav bar. So we're going to create a component in the components folder here called navbar.view. Okay, all your Vue components are going to have a .view extension. And when we add our script tag, since we're using the composition API and we're using the shorthand, then you always want to make sure you add setup here. If you don't add setup, then you're going to have to export default, you know, if you're using either the options API or if you're using the explicit setup function. So here I'm going to import, and we want to bring the logo in. So that's going to be from, and we can use @ /. So this is a shorthand or an alias for the source folder. So from there we want to go into assets / and then img and then logo.png. I believe it's a PMG. Yeah. All right, so we're going to bring that in, and then let's create our template. And I forgot Emmett's not working for template. And to get the HTML, I'm going to go into index.html, or any of them really, and grab the nav tag. So that whole thing, because there's no sense in us typing out all that. and then paste that in the template here, and then we just want to replace the image or the image source, because right now it's just pointing to images/logo, but what we want to do is bind the logo variable that we just created above to this source. So we can do v-bind. See, so now you already know what this stuff is, and I don't have to explain it because we already went over it. And we want to bind it to that logo variable. So in here we can just put logo, and then we can even use the shorthand and just do :source. All right, so let's go ahead and save that, and let's go to our version. Now obviously it's not going to show because we need to bring this nav bar into the app.vue. So up at the top here, let's say script, let's add in setup, and then let's import the nav bar. Okay, that's going to be from our alias / and then components / and then nav bar. And then we can replace this h1 here with the nav bar embed, and there we go. Okay, so I mean these right now are going to like .html. Obviously those don't go to the right place, and we don't even have the Vue router set up. So don't worry about the actual links for now. We'll get to that later, and we'll get to the highlighting each of these links later. So the next thing I'll do is the hero component, which is going to be this right here. It just has a title and a subtitle, and this is where we're going to get into props, right? Because components can have data passed in, and those are called props. So what we'll do is in components, let's create a new file called hero.vue, and we'll create script setup, and let's add our template. Okay, and then for the template, I'm just going to go to the index.html, and we're going to get the next section. So I created this template so it's just easy to go in and grab each section. I know some people really don't like that, to have to copy and paste, but we also don't want to type out a bunch of classes. That's not what this is about. So let's paste that in the template, and we'll just save it for now. I'll do the props after. Let's just bring it into our app. So we'll just copy this down, and let's take navbar here and replace that with hero. And then let's see, under that, we'll say hero. And there we go. Now, like I said, we're going to get into props. So I want to be able to pass into hero. I want to be able to do this, title equals, and then set it to, we'll just say test title for now. Okay, so I want to be able to pass this in and have that show here as the h1. So to have props in a component, we have to go into the script, and we have to first off import define props. Okay, so we're going to import that from Vue. Then we want to call define props, and then we can pass in here an object of the props that we want. And there's a couple ways to do this. We can say title, because that's what I want to call this prop, and then we can just set that to string like that, or you can set it to an object and then have type and then put string. Okay, now the reason I want to do this is because I also want to have a default prop. So if I put here default, and I'm going to set that to become a Vue dev as the default. So basically, if I don't pass anything in, if I don't pass a title in, then this is what's going to show. Now we can just simply go down to the h1 and replace this with our double curly braces and title. And if I save, now we get test title. Okay, now I want to be able to pass in the subtitle as well. So let's say subtitle and set that to test subtitle, and then what we would do is just add that. So I guess we can just copy that down and do subtitle. It's going to be a string, and then for the default, let's set that to this text right here, and then in the paragraph get rid of that and have subtitle, and there we go. Now if I don't pass either of these in, which I'm not because I just want to use the default, then there we go, we have the default values. So that's essentially how you use props. You just bring in define props, you define them with their type and a default if you want one, and then just use them. So pretty simple. So the next thing I want to do is these two cards here, which I'm going to put them both in a component called home cards, and then I'm going to show you how we can use a container component, which is a component that wraps around content. So let's start off by creating in components home cards dot view, and we'll add script, add our setup, and then our template. And notice I'm not doing any style because we're using Tailwind classes, so there's really we don't need any custom styling. So to get the home cards HTML, I'm going to go to theme files and then the index, and this developers and employers, that section is what I want to copy. So I'm going to grab that, paste that into the template, and for now just save it, bring it into our app.view. So we'll copy that down, and let's replace that and that with home cards, and then we're going to put that down here, home cards, save it. Let's look at our version, and there we go. Now I want to, like I said, have a wrapper component called card and put the data, or not the data, but the content of each one of these inside of it. So basically this right here would be, instead of having a div here, we could have card like that, and then anything that's in here would be in that card, and we can have certain background color props and stuff like that in the card. So let's create a new component called card.view, and we'll have script, setup, and template. And let's see, the way that I want to do this is where we have our home cards, we have this div with the class of BG Gray, P6. Basically, I want to have this div, so I'm going to just copy that and paste that in here with an ending div. And ultimately, I want to be able to pass the background color in so we can have a dynamic background color for the cards, but I'll just leave the gray for now. And the way that we output the content that we wrap is with a slot like this. And if you've used React, it's similar to when you have a children prop, right? And you output that. So now, yeah, we can save that. And now in home cards, I'm going to bring in the card component. I don't know why it's not coming up. So slash component slash card.view, and then I'm going to replace the div right here where we have the P6 rounded shadow. I'm going to replace that div with the card component, and we're going to wrap that content. Okay, so that's the first card. Then we have this one which has the BG green, so we're going to replace that div with card as well. So if I save that, now it's working, but notice the BG green is now gone, right? Because the card component has BG gray. So what I'd like to do is have a prop for that class, for the background. So let's go up into the script of card, and let's import, we're going to import define props, and then let's define props. And I'm going to call this BG for background, and let's say type is going to be string, and then let's add a default, and the default will be BG-gray-100. And now we can come down here and we can use this BG prop in place of this, but we need this to be dynamic, right? Because we're going to be adding a variable to it. So what we can do is bind to this by putting a colon here, or you could do vbind colon, and then instead of double quotes, well, actually no, we still want double quotes, but we want to add in backticks after it. Okay, because when you put a colon here, whatever you're putting within the double quotes is JavaScript. Okay, it's actual code. So right here, So we want the backticks, and then we want to replace that with BG, like that. So now if I save, they're still both gray, but I should now be able to go to the second card and pass in BG. You'll see it comes up here. And let's say BG-green-100, save it, and now that's green. If I passed in red 100, so now I have this dynamic component where I can just pass in the color that I want this card. And I can reuse that all around the project. All right, so that takes care of that. Now, the next part is going to be here, the browse jobs. So what we're going to do is let's just close some of this stuff up. Just leave the app open. And we're going to create a new component called job listings, plural, .view. And let's add a script tag with our setup. And then we'll have our template. And just for now, I'm just going to say jobs listings or job listings. Okay, and then we're going to bring that into our app.view. So import jobs, our job listings, and let's output that right here. So job listings, and then if we look at our project, you should just see job listings. Now, as far as the data goes, ultimately we're gonna use JSON server, which is like a fake backend REST API, but for now we're just gonna use a JSON file. So if you go to the code in the repository, and let me just grab that real quick. So code dev. Okay, so this is the code from the repo, and you'll see that in the source folder there's a jobs.json and jobs2.json. So right now we're going to be working with the jobs2.json. There's just a slight difference here, but we do have to change the structure later, so that's why there's two versions. So let's bring that into the source folder. Okay, make sure you bring it into source, not the root. And then we're just going to rename that for now to just jobs.json. And what we have is an array of objects that have an ID, a title, a type, description, location, salary, and then a company object with a name, description, email, and phone. Okay, so what I'm going to do is now in that job listings component, I'm going to import that data. So let's say import, and I'm going to call this job data, and that's going to be from, and then up one level. Actually, we can just do @ and should be, yeah, that should work, right? Did I put it in the right place? Yeah, source. All right, so that should work. Now, in order to make that data reactive, which we need to do because we're going to be adding and deleting and stuff, so we also want to import ref from Vue. Okay, and then what we can do is just create a variable called jobs and set that to ref, and then pass in job data, making it reactive. So again, if you're coming from the React framework, it's similar to useState. And just to see if that's actually getting them, let's do a console log, and it's going to be jobs.value, because remember, since we're using ref, we use .value. And if I open up the console here, you can see that it is fetching that data. So array, and there we go. All right, so now that we've done that, I'm going to use v4 to loop over them and then output each one like this. All right, so let's go into the template here. And yeah, I guess for now I'm just going to have a div. And let's say v-4. And we're going to set that to, let's say, job in jobs. And we need to give it a key, so colon key, and we'll set that to, let's say, job.id. And then in here, all I'm going to output for now, just to make sure this is working, is the job.title. And there we go. So we know that we're fetching the data. I mean, fetching, if you even want to call it that, we're just getting it from a file. Now we want to have like the title and stuff in here, and it's going to be kind of confusing if I copy it. So let's just type this part out. So I'm just going to put section, and the section, we're going to give this a couple classes. Let's say bg-blue-50, and then padding on the x-axis 4, padding y-10, and then in the section we're going to have a div with the class of container-xl, and also on that we're going to say on large screens we want to use the container class, and then also m-margin-auto. And in that div we're going to have an h2, and that's going to have a class of text-3xl, and then let's do font-bold and text-green or text green 500, margin bottom 6, and text-center. All right, and that's going to just say browse jobs. Okay, now let's see, we want to go under the H2, and that's where we're going to have our grid. So let's say grid, and then grid dash calls dash 1 and gap dash 6. So that'll be a 1 column, but on medium screens and up, so MD colon, and this is just Tailwind. If you don't understand these classes, that's fine. Don't worry about it. That's not really the point of this course. So MD grid calls 3. All right, so in here is where we want to have this div that iterates over the job. So I'm going to cut that from here and put that inside the grid like that. All right, so now it's going to look like this. And if I make this bigger, you'll see that it goes into 3 columns. But obviously that's not the data we want to display, just the title. We want the whole card, this whole box. All right, so what we can do is go into the template, the index.html, and down in the browse jobs, we already have this stuff, right? So what we can do is just grab one of these listings, and they're labeled, they're commented. So I'm going to grab this first job listing, which ends right here. So I'm going to copy that, and then we're going to create another component for just a single job listing. So job listing singular dot view, and we'll add script setup, and then our template, and then I'm going to paste that into the template. Now I'm going to want to show this job listing component for every listing here, right, instead of this div. So let's bring in the single job listing component, so import job listing, and then I'm going to replace this div right here with job listing, and it's not going to be a wrapping component, so we can get rid of, oops, I hate when it does that. Just get rid of this, and then add a slash at the end here, but we also need to pass in the job, right? We're looping through right here, so we're getting the job, so we need to pass that in as a prop. So we're going to say :job, so we're binding it to job. Now we should be able to access this as a prop, okay? And notice that now it's showing all the boxes, but it has all the hard-coded data, so, or the hard-coded content, so it's all the same. So let's go into the job listing, and let's prepare to get that job prop. So in order to do that, we need to import define props, and then we're going to define props. Oops, define props, and we're going to pass in an object with job, which is going to be an object. Okay, so now we should have access to job, so I can replace full-time here with double curly braces and then job.type. Okay, now if I save that, well, I think one of these, yeah, this one right here says part-time. So we know that that's the data from the file. Let's replace this with job.title. Now we have all different titles. And then we have the description, so replace that with job.description. The salary, which, how is this? Let me just see how this is formatted. So the salary is, yeah, like 70, 80K, so it doesn't have the slash year. So let's just replace this with job.salary. Okay, what else? We got the location. We also have the icon, which doesn't show up because we're not using Font Awesome. I'm going to use another package called Vue Awesome for that, but we'll get to that after. Let's change this, the hard-coded, to job.location. Okay, and then finally the link here, it's going to job HTML, which obviously that's not correct. So what we're going to do is bind. So we're going to use the colon here and then replace this, because we do have to have the ID in here, so it's going to be dynamic. So we'll replace that with, we'll just have quotes and we'll say /job/ and then let's concatenate the job.id. And that should do it. So now if I were to click on the read more and we look at the link, it's job/3. Right? If I go to this one, job/1. So they're bringing us to the right place. Obviously, we don't have that, that route. We don't even have the router set up yet, but the link is correct. And now the content is correct. Now, the next thing I'd like to do, I'm just going to make this bigger so we can see it better. I want this whole job listings, I want to take in a couple props. One is going to be limit, so that we can limit it, because I don't want all of them to show, which right now, if I had 30 jobs here, they'd all show on the home page. I want to limit it to 3, so we'll pass limit in as a prop. And then also, if we look at the template that view all jobs, I want to include that in this component as well, but have an option to not show it, because I do want to show it here, but when we use that component on the jobs page, I don't want to show it. So we'll have a prop of limit and a prop of show button. So let's do the limit first. So we'll go into job listings. So I'm going to just close that up. This, yeah, we can get rid of that for now. So in job listings, I'm going to also bring in define props. And then let's define props. And we're going to take in a limit, which is going to be a number. All right. So there's a couple ways we can use this limit. What I'm going to do is come down to the V4 and just add on to this where it says in jobs, I'm going to use .slice and then pass in from 0 to the limit, or then just show all of them. So jobs dot length. Okay, so now if we were to pass in, let's go to app.view where we're embedding job listings, and let's say limit equals 3. Actually, since it's a number, we need to add the colon in front of it. So if I do that, now it's only showing 3. If I put 2, then it shows 2. Okay, so that was pretty easy. Now for the button, we don't have that in our job listings component yet, so let's go to the theme files in index.html, and under the browse jobs section, you have this section with the button. So I'm just going to copy that, and then we're going to put that directly under this section. Okay, but I only want this to show if the show button is true. So what we can do is pass in show button, which is going to be a Boolean. And actually, I want to have a default for that. So let's set that to an object with a type of Boolean, and then a default of false. So it won't show by default. And then all we have to do is go down to the section where the button is and add a VIF and set that to show button. All right, so save that. We don't see the button, but if I go to app.view and I add show button, actually we're going to do colon show button and set that equal to true, now it shows. All right, and that button right now goes to jobs.html, so we also want to change that. It's just going to go to /jobs. So change that. There we go. All right, cool. And that's just cached. Let me reload it. There we go. So the next thing I want to do is talk about the computed function. And this is a function that returns a value based on other values. And it will run when that particular value changes. And if you're familiar with React, it's kind of like how the dependency array in the useEffect hook works. When that dependency changes, that effect runs, or that function runs. So let's use it to show a truncated version of the description. So basically we'll have a short or truncated version with a button to show more, and then it will show the full description. So that's going to be within the job listing component, the singular. So let's close job listings and go to job listing, which is this one. Okay, and in order to use computed, we're going to bring it in. So let's bring in addition to define props, we're going to bring in ref, and we're going to bring in computed, because we need a piece of data for the true or false if we want to show the full description or not. All right, in fact, let's go right under define props, and let's say const show full description, and we're going to wrap this in ref because this is going to be reactive, and set that to a default value of false. Now I want to access the job up here. So what we can do is this define props, we can actually set that to a variable. So set it to props, and then props.job should give us the job. And we can say like props.job.description to get the description. So now we're going to use computed here. Let's say truncated description. Ultimately, that's what this is going to give us. And the way we use computed is we just set it like this and then pass in a function. All right, and then let's say let description, and I'm going to set that to props.job.description. Okay, so that's going to come from the prop that's passed in, the job. And then let's have an if statement under that, and we want to check to see if it's, let's say if it's false. So if not, show, if not, show full description. And remember, since we're using ref, it's going to be dot value. And if that's not, then we're going to say description and set that to description, and then dot substring. So this is how we're going to truncate it. We're going to cut it off a little bit. Let's do 0 to 90. And let's add an ellipsis after it. So we'll just concatenate onto it 3 dots. So it'll get the first, 90 characters. And then after the if, we'll just return description. Okay, so now anytime the show full description changes, the truncated description is going to run. Okay, now we need we'll do the toggle after, because we need a function to actually change it. This is just checking to see if the value is false. If it is, so if we don't want to show the full description, then it's going to narrow it down using substring. So let's go down to where we have the description, and instead of job.description, we're just going to say description. Let's see, why is that not showing? That's because we don't want to show description is a variable in this computed. We want this truncated description. There we go. So you can see it's not showing the whole thing, and it's adding the ellipses onto it. So now let's just have a function to toggle that. So we'll say const toggle description, or maybe we should call it toggle full description. And we'll set that to an arrow function. And all we're going to do is take the show full description dot value, and we're just going to set it equal to not show description full show description dot value. So if it's true, it'll get set to false. If it's false, it'll get set to true. Now we just need a way to actually trigger that. So let's put this right below the truncated description here. So basically we have, let's put this in a div. So we'll go like this and move that into the div, and then under the div, let's have a button. And I'm going to give this button couple classes. We're going to do text-green-500, and let's say on hover we want to do text-green-600, and then margin bottom 5. Okay, so in the button, I want to show either less or more. So what we'll do is we can say, and I don't even think we've used a ternary yet. We can use ternary operators inside here. So we can say like show full description. If that's true, then show the text of less. If that's not true, then show the text of more. Okay, so if I save that, we see more, right? Because it's not showing the full description. So let's add an event to this button now. So we'll say @click, and let's set that to that toggle full description. What did I do here? Okay, so I'll save that, and now let's click on the more, and now I can toggle this particular description. I can toggle this one. All right, cool. So now what we want to do is the icons. Where we have these locations, I want to have the little map icon. Right now, if we look where that's supposed to be, which is, where is the location? Right here, we have the I tag with the font awesome icons, which aren't showing up because we haven't included font awesome. And if you want, you could just as well include the font awesome CDN, or you could install it, but I'm going to use something different called prime icons. So let's go to, or just search for Vue. Actually, it's just prime icons. And you can use this for React and other frameworks as well. So it's this right here. So you can see prime ng for Angular, prime React, prime faces. We want prime Vue. And then we can install it like this. And then all we have to do is import the CSS into our main.js file. So let's install it. I'm going to go here and npm install prime icons. All right, and then let's go to the main.js. And right under that CSS, I'm going to paste that in. And that's it. Now we can use these classes to have the icons show up. So where we have the FA solid, this right here, the I tag, I'm going to just get rid of all those classes, and I'm going to replace it with PI, so prime icons, and then I'm going to use PI-map-marker. That's the icon I want. And then I'm just going to add in text-orange-500, which is just, or 700, which is a Tailwind class. So let's save that and see if that shows up. And there it is. Okay, so you can use these icon classes wherever you want. Now I think that we've come to the point where we want to start to use the router. Our home page is pretty much done, right? There's not really anything else we need to do here. We have the data. Obviously, we want to fetch it from JSON server in a little bit, but I want to introduce the router first and get that set up. Now, remember at the beginning when we used the create view CLI, we could have said yes, and it would create the router file for us. It would create our home route and all that. And that's probably what you're going to do from now on after this, but I want to show you how to set it up from scratch. So, of course, we need to install it because it's not bundled within the framework. It's like using the React router. It is the official router to use. So let's go ahead and, what am I doing? Import. npm install, and then it's going to be view-router. Okay, now we need to set up the router in a file. So let's see, we want to go into the source folder and create a folder in there called router. Let me just close this stuff up. So in router, we're going to have a file called index.js. And this is going to be our main router, where if we want to add, an about page and set that to an about view, we would do that here. If we want to set our home page to a home view, we'll do that here. So let's start off by importing, and this code I'm writing right now, this would be included if you chose yes in the beginning. So we want to bring in create router, and we want to bring in create web history. I think that's right. Yeah, create router, create web history, and we're going to bring that in from view-router. Let's close that up. Okay, and then we're going to need a view to bring in. So why don't we create in the source folder a folder called views. Now a view is basically a page, right? And your views can have multiple components. So in this case, I want our home view to basically be what we have here in our app folder, or in our app file rather, right? So if we go to app.view, the only thing I want to leave here is the nav bar, because I want that on every page. The hero, home cards, and job listings should only be on the home view. So what I'll do is cut these imports, and then we'll put that in. Let's go into views and create a new file called home view. And it still is a component, so it'll have a .view. And then let's add script and setup. And in that, we'll paste that in. And then we'll have our template. And I'm going to grab from the app.view everything except the nav. Okay, so we'll do that. If I save, now we're only going to see the nav bar. But let's go to home view, paste that into the template. All right, and then let's see, we're going to go back to the view file, the router file, which is router and then index.js, and we're going to want to create that home view. So first off, let's import it. So import home view from @views home view, and then we're going to create a variable here called router, and this is going to use that create router, which takes in an object, and we need to add this history, and this is where we use create web history. So this is so we can go, back. We can use the back button and stuff, just like if it were a regular server rendered app. And then we're going to pass in here import.meta.env.base_URL. So that will provide the base URL. Then after that, we want to provide our routes, which is going to be an array of objects, and each one is going to have a path. So let's do / for the home, and you can give it a name. So I'm going to give it a name of home, and then the component that you want to load, or the view in our case. So home view. All right, and then at the bottom, don't forget you have to export this as default router. All right, so it's not going to work just yet because we're not doing anything with this. There's actually 2 steps we have to take for this to actually work. First, in our main.js, in the entry point, we need to use the router, the file that we just created. So let's import that. So we can say import router from, and then we can just do ./router. We don't have to do /index.js because since we named it index.js, it'll automatically load that. All right, and then we can just come down here, and instead of just saying create app, I'm actually going to set a variable of app, set that equal to create app, and then down at the bottom we can say app.mount. So this is doing the same exact thing, but now I can also say app.use and then pass in router. All right, so that'll use the router. So if we look at this, it says failed to resolve import components job listing view. Oh, I didn't use the alias there. All right, there we go. Okay, so the last thing we have to do in order for the stuff to show, the home view, is in the app.view, we need to bring in something called router view, which is like the outlet. If you've ever used React Router, then you put an outlet in your main layout, and that's what we're going to do here. Wherever we put this is where the view will show. So I'm going to go right under the nav bar and say router view, save it, and now you can see that we have our entire home view showing, right? Because we're at /. If I go to / anything else, it doesn't show. And we can create a not found page as well. So yeah, that's how we set the router up. Just to kind of reiterate, we create the router folder, the index.js, we add our routes, create our view, bring it in, set it as the component, and then in the main.js, we use the router, we import it, and then we use it. And then in the app.view, the main component, we use our router view, which is like the outlet. All right, so now we have the router set up. And again, if you chose yes in the beginning, all this would have been created for you, and in your app.view, in your main.js, this would be here too, the router view, and also in basically everything we just did would already be included. Now let's do our jobs route, this right here, which goes to slash, well, right now it's going to jobs HTML. We actually want that to go to slash jobs. So let's go to the nav bar. And let's see, we're going to change this. So this home is going to go to slash. Now, ultimately, we're not going to use A tags. There's something called router link, but for now, we'll stick to A tags just to create this route and go to it. So let's say slash jobs, and then this one is going to go to slash jobs slash add. Okay, so if I go to slash jobs, obviously nothing shows here. So let's create a jobs view. So under views, new file, jobs view.vue, V-U-E, and we're going to have our template. And then all I'm going to do here is use the job listings component that we already created. So let's say script setup, and we're going to import the job listings, plural, and then we're just going to embed that here, job listings, and we're not going to pass in a limit or the show button true. All right, so if we do that and then go to our router file, so router index, bring in that view, so you can see kind of the process of adding new views. So jobs view, and then we can just copy that down, and let's say slash jobs, change the name to jobs, change the component to jobs view, save it, and there we go. Okay, so we're at jobs, and this highlighting is not working yet. We'll get to that, but I can go home and I can go to jobs. All right, now before we do the highlighting, the active link, let's change the A tags to use the router link. So we'll start in the nav bar. So up at the top here, we're gonna import router link from view router, and then anywhere where we have an A tag, including the logo right here, I'm going to change that to router link. Okay, make sure that the ending tag changes as well, and instead of an href, it's going to be a 2. Okay, just like with React Router. And then let's change this to just slash. It's going to go to the home page. So that's that. And then let's go to these 3 A tags, change that to router link. Again, make sure that the ending tags, sometimes it doesn't register, so make sure we do. Whoops. Is that right? I think that's right. I don't know why it's putting that on the next line. But yeah, that should work. So let's go to this one. Oh, actually, you know what? We want to change this. Let's change all of these. So Command or Control D again, and we'll change those to 2. Okay, so this one here, router link. Make sure we add the ending tag. And then this A tag, router link, add the ending tag. All right, so let's save that, and I'm going to click on home. All right, so now that works a lot faster because it's not actually refreshing the page, right? It's a single page app, so the JavaScript is doing all the work. Now there's some other places where we have links, right? Here, these 3, and this. So let's go into our home cards. We can close some of this stuff up for now. Let's go into components and then home cards, and again we want to bring in router link, and then we want to exchange the A tags for router link, and we're going to change the href to 2, and this is going to go to slash jobs. And then this one here, let's see, it's going to be router link, And we're going to change that to 2 and change this to /jobs/add. Okay, so that takes care of that. You can test those out. That goes there. Add job, that's not, we haven't created that yet, but it goes to the right place. And then we have the job listing. So we can close that up. Let's go to job listing. And let's import router link, and where we have the A tag, change that to router link and change this href to 2. Click on that and it goes to job 1. This one goes to job 2. Good. And then the button at the bottom, that's going to be the job listings component. So let's bring in router link, and down at the bottom, change this. Change that to 2 and make sure that the ending tag gets put on. There we go. Okay, so now all the links are working and they're all using router link. So now let's do the active links. If I'm on the jobs page, I want that to be highlighted, not home. So if we open the nav bar, and I'm just going to close that up, and then we want to basically just get the path here, and we can get that by using the use route hook from Vue router. So let's say use route, bring that in, and then we're going to have a function called is active link, and just set that to an arrow function, and it's going to take in a route path, which we're going to pass in, and we want to check to see if that route path matches the actual route path. Now we do have to set a variable of route to use route, and then we can access the actual route path with this. So what we can do is return if the route path is equal to the route path that's passed in. So if that's true, this will return true, obviously, and we can add a certain class. This right here, which is the BG, if we go down to the navigation, this BG green 900 is what's giving it that. If I get rid of that, you'll see that that goes away. So we need to make this dynamic. Now, the way we can do this is just add a colon in front of class, and then we can make this dynamic. And we can actually set an array here with class names. So for instance, if I save this now with no class names, it looks like this. But I can add in here a string of text white, and that will add the class, right? So basically I want to re-add these classes here, the text white and the rounded and the padding. So text white, and then let's do px, what is it, px-3, I believe, was that it? Yeah, px3, and then py2. So I'm just adding in array items here for the classes as array items, and then rounded dash MD, right? So now it looks like that. And what I can do is, let's go, I guess we'll do it at the beginning here. We'll say is active link, and we want to check to see if it's slash, because this is the home link. And if it is, so we'll use a ternary here. If it is, then we want to show a specific class. If else, then we'll show a specific class. And then we'll put a comma here. All right, so whatever I put in here will show if it is the active link. And I want to do BG green dash 900. And then else, I don't want the BG green, but I do want to add a hover. So I want the hover to be BG dash gray dash 900. I think that's right. Yeah, BG gray 900. And let's also do hover BG, not BG, text dash white. All right, so I have this on the home link. So if I go home, now you can see that that has that background. If I go to jobs, nothing has it because I haven't added this to the jobs link. But let's do that. So I'm going to just grab this whole router link and then replace this except I want to change the text back to jobs, and when I'm checking for the is-active link, I want to check for /jobs. So I'll save that, and now jobs is highlighted. And if I hover this, we get that black background, right? Now we want to do the same to, wait, why can't I click? Oh, the link, the actual link. Let's see, so we have, yeah, right here. So this should be /jobs. All right, good. So now we'll do the same to the add job. So let's, again, just copy one of these router links and replace this router link. But we want to make sure we change the URL to jobs add. And then the is active is going to be jobs add. And the text is going to be add job. Now, if I click on that, even though it doesn't work, we don't see anything down here, it is the active link. So now we have that functionality. So next, why don't we have a not found page? Since we don't have a route for our job /add, it should say like not found, right? So what we can do is create a new view. So in views, I'll create, let's say, not found view.view, VUE. And basically, the only thing we need to bring in here is the router link, so we do need our script tags set up, and then let's import router link, and then we'll have our template. And in the template, I'm just going to grab from the theme files. There's a not found HTML, so I'm going to go down to the main section, which shouldn't be much, right? It's just this section right here. I'm going to copy that and then add that in the template, and then just change a couple things up. So one, the link, we need to change that to router link, and make sure you add the ending tag. So router link, and then the actual link, actually we're going to change this to 2. So 2, and then that's going to go to the home view, so that'll be /. All right, now we have the font awesome icon here, so I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to use the what is it called? Prime icons classes. So let's do PI, and then PI dash exclamation. Let's do, what do we want? Exclamation triangle we'll do. And then I'm going to do text dash yellow 500. And let's do text dash 7XL, and then margin bottom MB5. Okay, now obviously that's not going to show just yet because we need to add the route. So we'll go to router index, and of course we need to bring the view in. So let's import not found view, and then we'll go down here, and the way we can do a not found, they actually make it pretty simple. So for the path, we can set that to / and then : catch all, and then in here we're just going to have .*. So basically any file or resource we go to that doesn't exist, it's going to match that path, and we'll give it a name of not-found, and then the component that we want to load is the not found view. All right, so we'll save that, and there we go. 404 not found. Got the nice icon, and go back. Good. So anytime we go to a URL that doesn't exist, we're going to see that. So I think the next thing we should do is the single job view, right? If I click on read more, it goes to the correct URL, but we don't have anything here. So let's create the view first. So I'm going to go into views. And this one I'm going to call just job view dot view. And let's create our script, setup, and template. And what I'm going to do from here is just grab from the theme files. I'm just going to get the hard-coded stuff, and then we'll replace it with dynamic data later. So let's go to job HTML and go to the main section. So this, we're also going to want this go back as well, but we'll do that after. This is going to be the main section. So I'm going to grab that whole section. Has the sidebar and all that stuff in it. So copy that, put that in the template. So it's just all hard-coded HTML for now, but let's just bring it into the router. So go to router and let's bring in import job view. Now this URL is going to have, I guess this URL is going to have an ID. So I'm gonna keep the catch-all at the bottom. You don't have to, but I just like to keep it at the bottom. So let's add in another object here, and the path, since it's going to have an ID, what we do is /jobs/ and then :ID. Okay, that's going to be the path, and then let's give it a name. So I'll just call it job, and then let's give it a component, and that's going to be the job view component. Save that. Okay, so that's not working, and that's because this is job/1. I do want to keep it as jobs because that's what I'm going to have everything else as, right? What did I do? Collapse this? Yeah, so we have jobs, and then we'll have jobs add and jobs ID. So what we need to do is change the actual link on these buttons. So that's going to be in the job listing, and right here I'm just going to add an S. All right, so if I click read more, there we go. And then obviously this is all hard-coded, so no matter what job I click read more, it's always going to be this data because that's what we have in the HTML. But we're actually going to come back to this because what I want to do now is implement JSON server, which will be like a real backend instead of just getting it from the JSON file. I mean, technically it does come from a JSON file, but JSON server sets it up so you can make actual get, post, put, delete requests to have, CRUD functionality. So I'm going to just close this stuff up for now, and let's install JSON server. So we're going to say npm install JSON-server. And the way this works is it'll actually look at a specific JSON file, and it'll use that as your data. Now we have this jobs.json, and the only thing we need to change, and this is why I had two versions of this, we need to make it so we have this array called jobs. So what I'm going to do is first off just copy this, so I'll duplicate it, and change the initial one. I'll change the copy, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to change that to jobs2 just so you have the old version as well. And then in jobs.json, all I'm going to do is we're going to have an object wrapping this whole thing, right? So opening curly brace, and then have jobs, and then set that to the array, right? So jobs set to this array, and then just add the ending curly brace down here. So that's all I want to change. And then JSON server will look at this and use jobs as a resource for create, read, update, delete, or I should say get, post, put, delete routes. So the way that we set that up is in our package.json, we're going to create a new script to load JSON server. So let's go to scripts and let's add, we'll call it server. You could call it anything. And what we want to run here is JSON-server and -- watch. And we want to watch in the source folder the jobs.json file because that's our data. And I want it to run on port 5000. That'll be our back end. So it's just like if you used Express and you created a REST API for jobs and you put it on 5000. It's the same exact thing as far as looking at it from the front end. All right, so now let's run that. So I'm going to make sure you keep the Vite server running, but go to another terminal and do npm run server. And let's see what happened here. Oh, I think I have, yeah, something's already running on 5000 that I can't really stop. So I'm going to change it. You can leave it at 5000. Yours will work as long as you don't have anything running. But I guess I'll change it to 8000. So now if I run npm run server, now it's running at 8,000, and I actually have this endpoint of localhost 8,000 jobs. If I look at that, there's my data. And I can make a post request to add a new job. I can do a put to update a job and a delete to delete a job. So that's, I mean, it's as easy as that to set up a mock REST API. All right, so why don't we now, since we have that set up, let's have our data that's in our job listings component come from JSON server. Now you can keep using the fetch API if you want, but I'm actually going to use Axios for this, which is just an HTTP client that's a little easier and a little, you don't have to write as much code to make requests. So I'm going to open up another shell here since I already have two running. And let's do npm install Axios. Again, if you want to use fetch, you can. And then let's go into the job listings component, listings, plural. And this is where initially we're bringing in that JSON file, which now if I reload, actually, why is it still working? Because I changed the format up of that. Oh, that's the theme. Yeah, so see, now this isn't working because I changed the format of that jobs JSON file. Now, we're not going to need to bring this in anymore because we're not going to use that. We're going to make a request to our back end. We're also not going to use job data here, so we can get rid of that and just put an empty array. So basically our jobs is going to start with an empty array. We're going to make our request in the onMounted lifecycle method and then fill this array, this jobs, with the data from the API. Okay, so let's bring Axios in so we can use that. Or again, if you want to use fetch. And we're going to bring in onMounted from Vue. So right here, let's also bring in onMounted. It's lowercase o. And usually we'll put this at the bottom. So let's say onMounted. And then we want to pass in onMounted. We're going to use a sync await since we're using Axios. And this is kind of like use effect in React. So let's do try catch. And we want to get the response. So we're going to send a request with await Axios, make a get request to HTTP localhost port, and mine is 8,000. So just put in the right port for your back end and then /jobs, right? And then we can set jobs.value to the response dot data like that. So that should update the jobs. And then we'll just do a console.error. And we'll say error fetching jobs. And I guess we can, yeah, we'll also output the error. Okay, so let's save that. And now we get our jobs back. And it should be here and on the jobs page because they both use this job listings component. So now it's fetching it from the from JSON server. All right, if we were to look at the network tab and reload, you can see where is it? Right here. So it's making the get request to localhost 8,000 jobs, getting it back. If we look at the response, there we go. So we're no longer just pulling in a file. Now, before we move on, what we've done here with ref and using ref here, that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I think that's probably what most people would do. But there's also something called reactive that we can use instead of ref. Now, there are differences. So the main difference is that reactive only takes objects. It doesn't take primitives like strings, numbers, and booleans. And it also uses ref under the hood. Ref can take objects or primitives, so you can use that no matter what. In fact, a lot of Vue developers will just stick to always using ref. And I probably would do that here, but I want to show you what else is available. And then ref has the dot value property for reassigning, where reactive doesn't use dot value and it can't be reassigned. And when I say reassigned, I mean you can't just take the actual variable and set it equal to something else. It'll be an object inside, and of course you can manipulate that object. All right, so what I kind of like to think of it as is, and this is for people that are already familiar with React. So when you have a form, sometimes you'll add a different use state for each field, like the name, the email, etc. That's like an example of using ref, where using reactive is if you were to use a single object that has each field inside of it. So an object with name, email, etc. That's just the way that I think of it. I don't know if that makes sense or not. That's just me. So let's bring in reactive, and then what we're going to do is, instead of just setting jobs to ref, what I'm going to do is call this state and set that to reactive, but we want to pass in an object. And then in that object is where I'll have my jobs, which starts as an empty array. And then I'm also going to have an isLoading, so you can have a spinner or whatever while it's loading. And I'm going to set that to true by default. All right, and then down here, what we can do is, let's see, so we have const response, we're getting that. Now remember, there's no dot value, but what you will do is say state dot jobs, because I called this state. So state dot jobs, we're setting that to the response data. And then I want to use the loading, which is set to true by default. So what I'm going to do is add a finally to this try catch, which just means whatever I put in here is going to run whether this runs or this runs. And in both cases, we want to set isLoading to false. So we would say state dot isLoading and set that to false. Okay, now this is not reassigning it. This would be reassigning it, state equals something. I'm just taking a value in the object, or a property in the state object, and setting that. That's perfectly fine. All right, so let's save that, and let's see, that's not working. And that's because down here, for a job, we want to say here state dot jobs, and then over here where we get the length, we want to say state dot jobs. There we go. So now that's working. If I go to jobs, that's working. So again, this is kind of this is optional. You don't have to do it this way, but I just want to show you guys other ways of doing it. Now we should probably use that loading. So let's set up a spinner, and there's an extension called Vue Spinner that's pretty cool. It's very easy to use. So I'm just going to install npm install, and it's called Vue Spinner. Very, very simple extension. Now we do need to, I believe we have to add the CSS file. Is that right? No, maybe we don't actually. Yeah, I don't think we need to add that. So what we'll do is bring in up at the top here, say import. Now there's different types of spinners you can bring in. I'm going to bring in the pulse loader from, and that's going to be from Vue Spinner /source /pulse loader.vue. Okay, so we're bringing that in, and then let's go down here to the template, and where I want to put this is right under the H2. So I'm going to say show loading spinner while loading is true. Okay, so we can use the vif. So let's have a div, and let's say v-if, set that to state, don't forget the state, and then dot is loading. So if that's true, and I also want to add a couple classes on this, so we're going to do text -center, and let's do text -gray 500 and py -6. And then in that div, I'm just going to put the pulse loader. All right, so that's if it's loading. And then down here where we have the grid with the job listing, let's just put a comment here. So we'll say show job listing when done loading. So we can use v else here, so v-else, and that should be all we need to add here. So if I reload, you can see real quick 3 dots. So it'll be there and it'll be here. All right, so now what I want to do is the single page, right? So we'll come back to that because right now this is all just HTML. So let's go into the job, where is it? The job view. And if you want, you could put this in a separate component if you don't want to put it all in a Vue file, but I assume it's a component, so we'll just do it here. Now, I'm going to use reactive just because I used it in the job listings. If you want to use ref, you can. So like I said, it's all preference. So what I'm going to import from here is going to be the pulse loader. So pulse loader from, and that's Vue spinner / source / pulse loader. And then I'm also going to import Axios because we need to make a request for the single job listing. And then let's go under that, and I'm going to also import, actually we'll just put this up here, and I usually like to put Axios at the bottom. So I'm going to import reactive, and then we're also going to need onMounted from, onMounted from Vue. And from the Vue router, let's import useRoute. So we're going to bring in useRoute, and we're going to bring in router link. Okay. All right, now let's see. We're going to initialize useRoute. So route, set that to use route. Now the reason I'm doing this is because we need to get, what is going on here? Why did I say import? Const. The reason I'm doing this is because we need to get the ID from here, and we need to make the request to the back end with that ID. And the way we get that ID is with this route variable. So I'm going to say const job ID, and I'm going to set that to route dot, and the way we do it is params and then dot ID. And the reason it's ID is because in the router right here is what I used. I used ID. If I use like slug or something here, then it would be params.slug. So next, let's create our state. So we're going to use reactive. And again, if you want to use ref, you can. If you want to use primitives, you can. But I'm going to I kind of like the idea of just having a state object. So let's say job, which will be just an empty object to begin with, and then is loading. Set that to true to begin with. And then let's do our onMounted. I'll actually copy it from the job listings. So this onMounted right here, I'm just going to grab this whole thing and paste that in, except now we're making a request to jobs / and then the ID. So let's actually change this to backticks, and we'll do jobs / and then job ID. Okay, and then let's see, state, this is going to be state.job, not jobs. And then this stuff, we'll just say error fetching job, and that should do it. Okay, now down here, let's figure out where we're going to put the loader. I guess I'm just going to put it, so we only want to show this if loading is not true. So why don't we go into the section and add a v-if. So we'll say v-if not state dot is loading. And then down at the bottom, let's just put, actually, you know what I'll do is grab from here. Yeah, just grab this. and I'll go under the section and then paste that in. So we're just saying if, actually here we want to say if else and get rid of this. All right, so if it's not loading, it'll show that. If it is loading, then it'll show this. And if I reload, you can see the dots. Now we want to make this obviously dynamic. We want to have the actual data. So let's go back to the top of the template and just kind of go down. So we have full time. Let's change that to interpolation of state.job. What is this type? And you can see it still says full time. Let's change this. I'm just going to copy that. And then we'll change that to title. Senior Vue developer. And then we have the location, which is going to be right here. So, whoops, job location. Let me just make sure that this is working right. So this one's Miami. Yeah, there we go. So Miami, good. The description, change that. Description. Then we got, wait, what is this? Oh, this is, wait, what is that? What did I just change? Oh, I changed the title. Idiot. Description. All right. And then we get the salary, so we're just going to replace this part of it with job.salary. Then we got in the sidebar company info. So this is the name, the title of the, I think it's the, what is it? The title, the name, let me check. So jobs, yeah, so we have company object and the name. So let's replace that with job.company.name. Okay, so that changed to Veneer Solutions. And then I'm just going to copy this, replace this with the company.description. Contact email, change that. Whoops, I just copied it. Change that with company.contact email. Okay, that changed. And then this one here, the phone, is going to be company.contact phone. Then down here we have the manage job. Now we're going to want to use a router link here. Did I bring that in? Yeah, I did. All right, so anywhere where we have A tags, which should just be the edit job. So we're going to change this to router link, add the ending tag. All right, and then we're going to change the href to a to attribute or a to prop, and then this is going to go to, since it's an edit, what do we want this to go to? So we can put backticks in here, and then we can say /jobs/edit/ and then the job ID. I believe that, oh, actually, you know what, let's not do that. Let's do state.job.id. So we're getting the ID from the database or from the back end. And then if I hit edit job, yeah, that's not working. What did I do wrong here? Can I not use backticks? Oh, to needs to have a colon in front of it. There we go. So it's going to jobs edit to, which is what we want. Okay, so this is all now dynamic. So if I click on any of these, it's going to show me the actual data coming from the back end. Now let's do the go back button, which is going to be pretty simple. We'll just create a separate component for that. So let's go to components right here, and let's create back button.view. Okay, we'll add our template. Now the back button, we can just get that from the theme files. If we go to job.html up at the top here, there's this right here, this section for go back. I'm going to just grab that. And I'm going to put that in the template. And since there's a link, so there's a link, and we'll also change the icon class. So let's bring in router link. And then let's change that to router link. Let's change this to 2. And we want to go back to /jobs. And then for the icon, let's get rid of that. And let's do, it's going to be PI. And what is it going to be? The arrow. So PI dash, let's see, arrow. And I want to do an arrow left. So we'll do circle arrow left. Let's see what that looks like. So we'll bring the back button into the job view. And then I'm going to put that right above the section. So back button. Okay, so let's add a little bit of spacing after that icon. So in the back button, we'll add, what do we want? M margin right 3 maybe? Yeah, I think that's good. Now, the next thing I want to show you is proxying, because right now we have 2 requests. We have one on the job view, making it to the single job, and then we have one in job listings to jobs. Now, you might have, 5, 10, 15 different requests, and you don't want to have this HTTP localhost 8000, because what happens when you deploy? So what we can do is add a proxy and say, instead of using localhost 8000, we can just use like /API. So we can do that in the where is it? The Vite config. So I'm going to open that up, and we're going to add this to the server object. So right here, let's add proxy, and proxy is going to be set to an object. And I'm going to do /API, because that's what I want to use, is /API/ and then jobs or whatever. So we set that to an object, and then we're going to add the target, and the target is going to be HTTP localhost, and then mine's 8000. If you used 5000 for your server, then that's what you want to put. And then we're going to add change origin, set that to true. And then we're going to have a rewrite path. And this is just what's in the documentation. We're going to say path.replace, because what we're doing is replacing, we're going to, like I said, replace this with, we want to replace it with /API. So in here, it takes a regular expression, and we can just put 2 forward slashes, and then the caret. So we're going to say begins with, and then we want to use escaping for the next slash. So / escapes the forward slash, and then API /. And then we want to pass in just an empty string. Wait a minute, does that? No, that's not right. That shouldn't be there. That should do it. All right, so just copy this. And then what we can do is go back to where we make those requests, like in the job view, and I should now be able to replace this with API or /API /jobs, and then same thing in the job listings, replace this with /API. And then just reload, so the jobs view is still working, and the jobs listing is working. And now I'm not explicitly saying localhost 8000. So that's proxying. So let's start to work on the add job page. I know this is a long crash course, but I wanted to fit all this stuff into it. So, and if you've made it this far, congratulations. Most people don't. These days, at least. I feel like people just don't have attention spans anymore. They want to learn everything through 30-second TikTok videos. So let's create. I sound like a grumpy old man. So let's create a new view for this. So in views, we'll say add job view dot vue, and let's add, for now I'm just going to put template, and I just want to get it displayed, so I'm just going to say add job like that, and then bring it into our router. Let's close the rest of this stuff up, go into our router index, bring in the view, add a route for it. We'll go right here. Path is going to be /job/add. Name is going to be add job. Component is going to be add job view. So now we can see add job. So this is going to be a form, pretty long form, so we're definitely not going to type it out. Let's grab it from the theme files. So add job HTML, and go past the nav bar to the section, and we're going to grab the whole section. Again, I tried to make the theme files easy so that everything is just laid out in sections that you can just take. So we'll take that. Let's paste that into the template. Save it. And there we go. So we have our form. Now, obviously, we want to make this form function. So a couple things. Now, forms are where I do like to use reactive and over ref, right? So, because otherwise, I'd be creating a primitive for every single field. And even in React, I'll have an object in useState rather than, a separate state for each one. So let's add our script. And let's import reactive. Okay, and then I'm going to call this variable form, set that to reactive, and pass in an object, and we're going to have all the fields. So type. Now type, I want it to be filled with full-time first. Rather than just being empty, I want it to show like that full-time, so I'm going to add that as a default value. And then title is this is going to be empty. Everything else is pretty much just going to be an empty string. Description, we have salary, we have location, and then company. Company is going to be an object, and in that we'll have name, description, contact email, and contact phone. Okay, so that's our data or our state. What else? So we want to bind these to the inputs, and that's where we use vModel, right? So let's come down here to the first input. Well, it's actually a select, but we're going to add to this v-model, and we're going to set that to form.type. All right, so if I save that, it should still say full-time. If I were to change this to part-time, then it'll say part-time. Now this has to match one of the actual options. So it has to be one of these or it's not going to show, right? If I put part-time 1 and save, it's not going to show it. It has to match one of those. So that's the select. Then let's go to the name. Is it name? Yeah, name. And then we'll add v-model and set that to form.name. Right, we'll go to the next one, the description, which is a text area, and vModel, set that to form.description. Then we get the salary, which is a select. We'll go right here, vModel, set that to salary, not salary, form.salary. Then we got the location, and then company info. So we have the company, what's this? This is going to be company name. So let's add vModel, set that to form.company.name. Then we get the description. Make sure you put it in the input or text area, not in the label. So here, let's say vmodel form.company.description, contact email. So v-model form.company.contact email, and then finally the phone. So form.company.contact phone. All right. And if we put like any default values, like for location, if I say hello and I look in location, it says hello. So these are they're bound together. Now the next step is to add the function or the submit event and point it to a function. So let's go to the form and let's say at submit, or you could use v on, and we're going to do submit.prevent to prevent the default behavior, and let's set that to, let's say, handle submit. All right, so with that, we're going to come up here under the form, the bottom of the script here, and let's say const handle submit. Okay, and then we're going to be making a request, so let's make this asynchronous. And then just for now, let's just see if we can get, if it actually works. So we'll do a console log, and I should be able to get like form.title. Let's try that. All right, so if I put something in here, I think these are required, so we need to just put in some dummy stuff here. And just put whatever, it doesn't matter. So add job, and then I'm going to look in the console. And let's see, we should see the title. So I'm getting nothing. Did I put a title in? I did. Oh, you know what? Did I put title or name? I did. I put name. So this right here, job listing name, should actually be, that should be form title as the V model. So I'm going to have to submit this again with a title. And there we go. All right. So I just had I had the V model wrong. So we're up to this point where we can actually, where we have the data bound to the inputs. We can get the data when we submit like that. So why don't we create a new job object, and let's set this to, let's say, title, set that to form.title, which we just saw that we can get, type, set to form type, what else, location, description, salary, what's next, company, which is an object. So that's going to be, we have name, which is form.company.name. And what's next? Description, form.company.description, contact email, and contact phone. All right, so that gives us the new job, and let's just test that out now, make sure that we get that, and make sure all the fields are actually filled in. So new job, and this is kind of a pain to, actually I think I have the fake form filler. I don't know why I'm not using that. That's a pretty good extension, fake form filler. Just add some data in there. So we have this object with company, so all that stuff is good. Description, yeah, so everything looks good, so it's catching the data as it should. And then we want to make the request. So let's do, I'll just copy from one of these other, from the jobs view, job view. This is inside the onMounted. I don't want the onMounted, I just want the try. We don't even need the finally. I guess I could have just typed it. So we're going to say response, but we're making a post request now. So we want to say post, and it's going to be, the endpoint will be API jobs. You can actually just make these quotes, or you can keep backticks. Some people, I've seen a lot of people lately just always use backticks. So API jobs, and then we want to pass in the new job as our data. And then we don't need to do this state thing. What I do want to do is add a toast. So I'll say to do show toast, which is like a notification. And then let's router, so router.push, and then we'll pass in some backticks and say /jobs/ and then from that response, we want the data and we want the ID. So it'll go to the actual job that we add. All right, and I want to add a toast down here if there's an error. So let's try that out. I'm going to go ahead and just reload. I'll just say test job, and we can put anything in here. Let's use the fake filler again. Add job. Let's see, what did I... Axios is not defined, so I didn't bring in Axios. All right, let's try it again. There we go. So that's just all the dummy data that I just added. If I go back to job listings, there it is. All right, one thing I'm missing here is the little map icon, so that's going to be in the job view. And let's see, right here, we want to replace that. Let me just see what I used for that. Job view. So it's map marker. All right, so I'm going to keep, I'm actually going to change it to text XL and then get rid of these classes. And we're going to do PI and then PI-map marker. And there we go. All right, cool. So up to this point, we have create functionality now. We have read. So all we have left is edit and delete, right? So I want to be able to come here and click delete and delete it. But before we do that, why don't we do the toast? Because I want a nice notification that slides in and says, you know, job has been added. So to do that, we're going to install a package called Vue Toastification. So let's say npm install Vue toastification at next. Make sure you put that at next or you'll get an error. So now we need to initialize that in our main.js. So there's two things we want to bring in here. We want to bring in the CSS file and the actual toast. So let's say import toast. Import toast from Vue toastification, and then the CSS is going to be Vue toastification /dist /index.css. So that'll give us the styling, and then we just have to come down here and we have to do app.use and then pass in toast. Okay, so that will give us the styling and the ability to use the use toast hook. So we're going to go back into the add form. So add job view, and from here, let's import. We want to import the use toast hook from Vue toastification. All right, now we need to initialize that. So I'm going to go right under the form here, and let's say const, and call this toast. Set that to use toast. And then wherever we want to use that, we can just replace that and say toast.success. So you can do success or error depending on what color you want the thing to be. So the message, I just want to say job. We'll say job added successfully. And then if there's some kind of error, then let's do toast.error, and I'll just say job was not added, and it'll console log the actual error. Cool, so let's save that, and now let's try to add another job. So I'm just going to use my form filler. So it's called Dennis Horn as the job listing name. We can change that to like just like Vue dev, and then add job. There we go. So we get job added successfully in our toast, and it brings us to the new job page. So moving on, we want to do the delete. So let's go into, that's going to be in the job view, so we can close that up. Let's go into job view, and then let's add the button first. So, or we have the button, but let's add the event. So down at the bottom where we have the delete button, I'm going to add @click, and we'll set that to, let's call it delete job. Okay, and then up at the top, before we create delete job, I'm just going to import a couple things. So I want to use the toast, so I'm going to say use toast, and that's going to be from Vue toastification. And then in addition to use route and router link, I'm going to bring in the use router hook as well. And then we need to initialize both of those. So let's do that. Let's see, we'll go right here and let's say const router, set that to use router. And then we want const toast, set that to use toast. And then we'll create our delete job. I'm going to put that right above the onMounted. So const delete job, use an arrow function. And this is also going to be asynchronous because we're using Axios. And we'll have a try catch. And in the try, let's await Axios dot, did I bring in Axios? I think I did. Yeah. So we want to await Axios dot delete because we're making a delete request now. And the endpoint, let's actually use backticks for this. And it's going to be /API/jobs/ and then the job ID. All right, so that'll make the request. And then let's say toast.success. And we'll say job deleted, or job deleted successfully. And then after that, I want to redirect to the jobs page. So this is where we can use router.push. And let's go to /jobs. And then in the catch here, let's do we'll do console.error. And we'll say error deleting job. And let's also show the error. And then after that, we'll do a toast. So toast.error, and let's say job, we'll just say job not deleted. All right. So I think that should do it. Let's come back over here. I'm just going to give it a reload, and let's click delete job. Job deleted successfully. And we probably should have a confirmation. So yeah, we'll do that as well. So we'll say const confirm, set that equal to window.confirm. And we'll say, are you sure you want to delete this job? And then underneath that, we'll say if confirm, then we want to do this. All right, so let's go to this one, delete job. If I say cancel, it doesn't delete. If I say OK, then it deletes, and I get redirected, and we get our toast. All right, so that was pretty easy. Now, the last major piece of functionality is the edit. So let's create the edit view. So in views, I'm going to create edit job view dot vue. And for now, I'm just going to put a template in here and just say edit job. And then we're going to add it to the router. So router index.js, let's bring that view in. So import edit job view, and then we'll add it down here. I'm just going to copy this. And we want it to go to job/edit/id. For the name, we'll do edit-job, and then we want edit job view for the component. All right, so now if I go to one of these and I click the edit button, it should bring you to the correct URL. Now for the form, we might as well copy the whole add job view page because it's similar. So I'm going to just grab everything in the add job view and paste it in here. And then let's change like the button text, we'll change that to update job. And I believe there's a heading as well. So this right here, instead of add job, we'll say edit job. All right, and then let's see, there's going to be some stuff that we need to bring in. Actually, yeah. So we need to use route from the router because we need to get the ID from the URL. So let's say import use route, and let's also do use router, and then we'll go right here and initialize those. So const route equals use route, and const router equals use router. And then we need the job ID, so let's say const job ID, and we can get that with route.params.id. So that'll give us the ID. And then we're going to need some state. So let's see, obviously we have our form fields state, but we're also going to create a state object. We're going to use reactive. Pass in our object and the job, which is going to be just an empty object to begin with, and we'll do is loading and set that to true to begin with. Now we need to fetch the job so that we can fill the form fields, so we're going to need onMounted as well. So let's bring that in from Vue. So in addition to reactive, we'll bring in onMounted. And then let's put that down at the bottom of the script here. So we want to go under handle submit, and let's say onMounted. We're going to pass in an async arrow function. And let's make the request. So we'll say const response. Actually, let's put this in a try catch. All right, so const response, set that to await Axios, and we're going to make a get request because we're getting the job. And let's use backticks /API /job/ and then the job ID, which comes from the URL. And then we're going to assign state.job to the response.data. Okay, now to populate the forms or populate the inputs, what we can do is just set form.type, set that to state.job.type. Okay, and then we'll do form.title, job title. We have form.description, state job description, and form.salary, state job salary, and the location. And then we have the company stuff, so form.company, which is an object, so we want the name, and that's going to be state.job.company.name. And I'll just copy this down. So in addition to the name, we have the description. So we'll grab this and this description. Okay, then the next one is going to be contact email. And then we have contact phone. All right, so that should fill the forms. Let's just add in the catch here. We'll do a console.error. And we'll say error fetching job and the actual error. And then we'll add a finally here, because once that's done, we want to set state.isLoading to false. All right. So let's see what we got here. Identify a router has already been declared. Oh. Bring in router here. So you can either do this, use this router. Yeah, you can either do that or use the hook. I guess we'll just use that so we don't have to initialize it. I think that'll work. Okay, so we can see that these form fields are all filled, which is good. Now the next step is to do the handle submit, because right now it's making a post request. We need to make a put request. So let's change the name of this, because it's not a new job, it's an updated job. And then this stuff can all stay the same because we're still getting it from the form. And let's see, down here, we're going to say response equals axios.put. And then the URL needs the ID. So let's make this into backticks. And let's do slash and say job ID. And then pass in updated job. And then for the toast, we'll say job updated successfully. And then for the push, we'll do the same thing. And yeah, I think that should do it. So let's try it. We'll save it, and then I'm going to just change something. So let's see, which one should I change? We'll go to Senior Vue Developer, click Edit Job, and I'm just going to change it to Senior Vue Dev. And we'll change the salary to, let's say, 90 to 100. And then update job updated successfully, Senior Vue Dev, and 90 to 100. So now we can update our job. So we have full CRUD functionality. All right, so that's it. I mean, that's our application. I know it's very simple in functionality, but there's a lot that you learned here that you're going to use in every single one of your Vue JS single-page applications. Now, when it comes to deployment, I actually am going to show you how to deploy this to Netlify. Vercel is another great service. Both of them have very generous free tiers. However, if we deploy this, the jobs aren't actually going to show up, because remember, we're using JSON Server, which is it's a local mock REST API. So we're not going to be able to access it from a production website. But I want to show you the process just so you know for your own projects. But there's really no sense in deploying this because it uses JSON Server. All right, so let's go into the terminal here. We can close this up. And what you're going to do first is, well, you don't have to do this step, because the build command is actually ran on Netlify, but you can run npm run build yourself. And it says building for production, and what it's gonna do is create a dist folder with all your static assets. Okay, so if you were deploying to like a shared host or something like that, then you could upload the dist content. Now, if you want to preview your production deployment, that's what npm run preview is for. So if I do that, it starts on 4173, and it just gives you your production, which is the same. It's the same thing as the dev server, same content and all that, but it is the production build. So now what you would do if you want to deploy to Netlify is create a GitHub repo and push to GitHub. I'm not going to do that part because you guys should know how to do that. Just get your repo up, and then let's go to Netlify, and I'm going to log in, and then you would create, and I already have my GitHub repo up. So you would go to Add New Site, Import from GitHub, and then search for your repo. So let's see, I want this right here, Vue Crash 2024, site name, could say like Vue-jobs project. Okay, and then here you can see it's going to deploy the main branch, and it's going to run npm run build on the server. That's why you don't have to run it before deployment. And then it's going to publish the dist directory. Okay, so if you had a different command, then you would change this, or if you had a different production folder, you would change that, but it's already what we need. We have no environment variables, so we should be all set to deploy. And this might take a couple minutes, so what I'll do is pause the video and I'll come back when it's done. All right, cool, so it's done. So if I click on the domain here, it's going to open up, and again, it's not going to show the jobs because we no longer are on the local server where we have JSON server running, right? If I go to jobs, there's nothing there. And if I were to open up the network tab, you'll see that there's just an error fetching the jobs. Well, that's the console, but if I go to network and reload, and it's trying to get, if we go to right here, yeah, it's trying to get from API jobs, but remember that's JSON server, which of course we didn't deploy, so it's getting a 404. But that's the process of deployment. And when you update your GitHub repo, it should automatically deploy on Netlify, which is really cool. But that's it, guys. I hope that you learned a lot from this, and I will see you next time.